A very good morning, everyone, and a good afternoon to the more Eastern Hemisphere. As always, let's give it another 2 or 3 minutes to see who else is going to join, and then we'll dive right into the topic. Okay, welcome again. My name is Thomas. I'm the field service rep for the region Europe, and today's topic is the flight log features in CAMP. For that, we will have a look at two different flight logs, the very new one with the flight log history and the legacy flight log that's also part of the system. Again, if you have any question, please put it in the question section. I will try to answer it then publicly so that everyone has an opportunity to learn. The webinar will be recorded. We will do several webinars on the same topic over the weeks and put all of them or the best of them online. You will receive an email with the respective link to the webinars afterwards. And if you need a certificate for the webinar, please let me know. My email address is available in the application. If you go to the contact page, just click on my name in the FSR's list and you can send me an email. Very good. As we start each webinar with the background settings, it's going to be the same for the flight log. We have no settings on the company level, but for each aircraft, we need to assign whether the customer or you want to use the flight log or not. This section is also used to integrate external systems like Leon and FOSS, but that's a different discussion. We can talk about that individually. You will see some of those checkboxes relevant for the integration of those external systems only. We have to activate on request, of course, the individual type of flight log. Could be the new flight log or the legacy flight log. We can set it to read only for a specific aircraft. What is very good for the new flight log is that all the units of measure that are requested can be set up as well. So if you operate a helicopter with more exotic units of measure, as you can see here. Hold on a second. Apologies, I had to shut off my phone. So if you had any units of measure that are not very common, we can select them from here, like high wind landings or overtorque events. And if it actually does not exist yet, we can create it for you. On the user level, there are also settings I would recommend. The first one being a flight log approval that already indicates for if this is activated for a user, it indicates that the new flight log allows for a workflow process. So it's possible to use iCamp to create a flight log. Maybe a pilot wants to do that. But then before the flight log actually affects the last actuals of the respective aircraft, it can go to someone in the back office, could be camo staff or could be someone from the flight ops department. And that person would need to approve the flight log first before it actually affects the aircraft. What you might also want to do is for pilots, you would probably want to restrict them from accessing the desktop application and look at the aircraft there. So you can set them up in the user management to allow the access to iCamp only. And that's pretty much it for the background settings. We will also talk about checklists in a couple of minutes. This webinar will be one of the shorter ones because the topic is less complex. Andy has asked the question where to access the settings page. Those settings on the aircraft level are either available on the dashboard when clicking on the registration, or you need to request it. So the activation of the flight log is done by CAMP. You cannot do that by yourself. We need to know what flight log you actually want to use, and then we can have it activated for you. We need to set the current hours and cycles to those stored here in the last actuals of the aircraft. And that's also the first item I want to mention here. If the flight log is active, we usually deactivate the aircraft times available here. So normally you would be able to go into an aircraft, click on aircraft times, and manually input the increment or the new times here, and then submit those hours and cycles or whatever unit of measure you're using. But if the flight log is active, you don't want to mess or don't want to match those two sources of information. So it's either the aircraft times here or the flight log available here. Right. So aircraft times are turned off usually for customers with flight log active. Okay. So if we are looking at the flight log history here now, that's the menu item that is used for the new flight log. But I also want to show you the legacy flight log, which is far more basic. If it is active for your aircraft, you would see it in the other menu. There is a section called flight log. And that's how it looks here. Okay, last night I activated the flight log for this aircraft, but somebody seems to have deactivated it. Let me check my fleet. I know that there are other aircraft as well, and we can use those other aircraft. Now you got a very nice excursion into the fleet management options. So if you have a large number of aircraft, you can create individual fleets for, let's say, each individual engineer or based on the aircraft type that you are operating. I did that now and added a fleet, an aircraft, sorry. Here we go. This one should be active, and it is. So that's the very, very basic one. It just records each leg. What you can see here is the time base for this flight log. You can pull up information on historical flight logs. You can switch to the next or previous week. You will see all the details of each day here, and here we can add another leg. Let's say that's flight number 789 from Vienna to Nice. 1.5 hours, one leg, submit, and that's it. So we see it here. And it adds to the new totals of the aircraft here. So that's the very, very, very basic functionality. We do have some customers that very much like this feature, because whenever a flight log or a tech log comes in from the ops department, they just capture the basic information, and it allows you to have the very granular aircraft utilization specs. So when you go at a later date to the reports, other reports, miscellaneous, there is one report for the utilization. Actually, there are two reports, an overview and a detailed utilization report. And this one will list every flight entered in the flight log. We do have some customers that don't use the flight log and just update those times on a weekly basis. Of course, the granularity of the utilization report will then be only weekly, right? You would see only an increase of hours and cycles every week and not for each leg. You could, if your employees or yourself are disciplined enough, you could just use this as well and enter each leg's information. But that's up to you. The granularity that is used is up to you. While if the flight log is active, obviously you would be forced to use a flight log for each leg. Are there any questions regarding the legacy flight log? It's really, really straightforward, not rocket science at all. Okay, there seem to be no question. Then let's have a look at the other aircraft with the real flight log. And there it starts to get interesting, because as you can see here, the flight log is available in the desktop application and also on iCamp. Right? And that's why I said at the beginning, with the background settings, you might want to restrict crew access to iCamp only. You probably don't want to give every pilot access to all the features that are available here, including work order manipulation, logbook entries, and so on and so forth. Yes, Andy, that's exactly the question that was answered. Now, Andy wants to know if the crews can use it. You would have to create users for each pilot or for each aircraft. However, your operation is set up. We do have customers with pool pilots, so they have probably 5 aircraft and 20 freelance pilots, and for each leg they call in a pilot. Then it's probably better to have individual logins. We also have customers that have fixed crews for each tail number. In that case, it might be, but not recommended, it might be useful to just create the user for each cockpit. So at the first glance, what information can we find here? We have different state of flight logs in the flight log history, so we can filter for a specific state. Could be approved, submitted, or in progress, and that gives you a glimpse on the workflow that can be established. So while someone is editing a flight log, they can save it, and then it's going to be in progress, and that's indicated in the list here with a completely blank square. If a flight log has been submitted, so the crew is completely done with everything, all the information is entered and they are ready to submit it, then they can click on the submit button and the status will change to submitted and the square will be half filled diagonally. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you had staff with approver privileges, they could go in, verify the information and approve the flight log, and then it will turn completely green. What's important to understand is that if that happens, it's probably better seen here. Yeah. If that happens, if it's approved, the logged totals will actually go to the aircraft. So there is a difference between the sum of hours and cycles or units of measure across all flight logs that are the logged totals, but they don't necessarily affect the aircraft yet. Only if they are approved, they will move to the last actuals of the aircraft so that the next due and remaining times are affected. Okay. Approval can only be given in the sequence of flight logs in the system. Okay, let's go back to the filters here. We have the option to look for a specific flight log ID. So whenever a log is created, the system will automatically attach the respective ID. You can also filter for a date range. So if you want to see, for instance, all historical logs of this aircraft, or there are not that many, you can set the date filter here as well. All the information in the flight log history can be exported to an Excel report. So there are no predefined PDF reports, but you can export all the information here. And probably do that on a monthly basis and let the flight ops manager or the responsible person approve what happened here or verify what happened here. So that's the basic information. Then you get details for each leg in the next tab. We can capture fuel and oil quantities and expense details for each flight log. Ahmed asked a question that's a very valid point. How do you apply corrections in flight logs? And I'm gonna show you a little later stage. We will walk through the individual flight logs. Or let's dive in. Let's dive in. Creating a flight log works exactly the same way on iCamp. You just click on the plus icon and it will open a new flight log. So if you need to correct something, you would just assign the date and indicate that this log that we want to create is a correction log and not a flight log actually. Then you can apply the corrected values. Hit save and it will show as a correction log. So what do we have here? 1625. Yeah. So in this case, I corrected this log for -1 hour. Okay, very simple actually. Mustafa probably asked the same question now, so I hope this answered the question. If it's a more complex topic that needs to be changed in the numbers here, sometimes when the flight log is set up, the analyst misses to take the current hours and cycles and move them to the last actuals of the aircraft. And in that case, just reach out to him, ask them to apply the correct values, and that should be it. Might also happen that an engine is replaced and you need to track different engine hours. Then those values, the delta between airframe and engine, has to be set up by the analyst as well. I hope that answers that question. So now I'm logged here as an administrator, and therefore I could go into an existing flight log. I could then verify the information listed here and approve. So if I do have approver privileges, or if a user is set up with approver privileges, they would have that approve button. Everybody else would just be able to save it. It could also be that you give the approval privileges to the pilot directly. If you don't want to establish the workflow, you can set up everyone as approver, and then they don't need to go through the approval process. They could approve their own flight log basically while they create it. Okay. What you can see here as well is the information for each leg that is stored. I don't know why it's loading now. We can have a similar look here into the flight log. So that's the same flight log seen in iCamp. You see the information that's captured is pretty much the same. You can create the correction log. You would add the date. What's also interesting to know is this chain icon, both in iCamp as well as in the desktop application, is showing whether the engine hours and cycles are linked to the airframe or not. This can be changed so that you will be able to enter individual numbers. Because now if I change something in the airframe values, they will automatically change the values on the engines, for instance. Okay. The information that is captured for each leg is starting with the flight details. So we can enter the flight number from the pilot's briefing. We add the pilot in command and second in command, departure airport, destination airport. The mission type can be captured. That's especially interesting for helicopter operators, right? So it could be law enforcement or personal transport or search and rescue, something like that. We also capture block times and flight times. So the system automatically calculates the totals. We capture crew and passengers. So here we are flying with 2 pilots and a flight attendant. And you can capture additional notes. That's the basic information. And again, if we move to iCamp, we have the same information available here, just with a different layout probably. The next field would be fuel information. What we capture here is the remaining quantity, the planned departure volume, the uplift, the actual amount before departure, the actual amount after landing, and the system calculates the consumed fuel. We can also add expenses. So when you receive or when you get the receipt, you can actually take a picture of the receipt, enter the information like cost per pound, quantity, total amount, payment method. You get the idea. Same is applicable for oil. So we could capture oil uplifts and also de-icing. And he had a question. I don't see flight log numbers which can contain up to 4 legs in our case. I don't quite understand the question. Can you detail it a little bit more, or let me see if I can add. Let me give you the mic.
Okay, good morning all. Well, our flight log can contain up to 4 flight legs, and each flight log has a number, and I didn't see the numbering that can be entered in your explanations.
Okay, the flight log number is automatically generated. What you can capture is the flight number from the briefing, right? So the flight number is the first field here in the details. And the flight log number is auto-generated.
Okay, so this is not the same as printed already in the paper flight logs.
Yes, yes. We're working in a database, and each entry gets its specific unique ID. You don't have to have pre-printed numbers for each paper, or for each sheet of paper, basically. That's correct. And the legs can be added here as well. So if you're done with the first leg, you can go ahead and add another leg. I don't know what the limit is, but on the other hand, for the crew, it makes no, or in an electronic system, it makes no difference whether you create a flight log for each leg or you put multiple legs into one log, right? I understand that to save paper, or if you want to put all the operation of one day into one flight log, you might want to put four legs on one sheet of paper. But if you have an electronic version, it doesn't matter whether you add 4 legs here on one flight log or to create 4 flight logs. It makes no difference. It's a database anyway. Okay, I'm gonna remove this leg now. After the details are filled, we know the totals of the aircraft, and we can add them up here to the totals of hours and cycles or the increment. We have taken this flight log from helicopter operation. Actually, I think it was the Bell software that we incorporated. I think it was called Skybooks or something like that. Anyway, so you see that heritage by providing the totals here. That comes from the hops meter in the helicopter cockpit, where the pilots would just take the latest actuals and enter them here. If you're done, you can save it. Same applies for the pilots here. If you're ready and any information is changed, you can save the log. In that case, I'm gonna approve it instead. But first, let's go back here. Remember, these are the current logged totals. And if I approve that log now as an approver, the state changes from submitted to approved. It turns completely green, and that should also reflect here. So the last actuals have been added. And what's probably confusing but important to understand here is the last actuals are now the 2 hours that have been added for the day before yesterday, because the correction log is not yet approved. And I'm going to do that as well now. Let me go in here as an approver. You see, that's a very good example here. There is a warning. The hours that I've entered are lower than tasks performed on the aircraft. So in that case, we can have a look at the tasks first. What happened here? Okay, there was a larger maintenance. So I'm not going to walk through all those tasks, but what you can do now is you can apply the corrections to the maintenance tasks first, because they would have the incorrect flight hours, hours of the aircraft, and then go back here and approve the log with -1 hour. I hope it's clear what's meant here. So we cannot approve a flight log if the hours are less than maintenance already on file. So we have to look at the maintenance first to see what had been updated with the incorrect hours. Then we can make the corrections, and then we can approve the flight log. Okay. Flight logs can only be approved in their original sequence. So if 3 of those flight logs are not yet approved, I cannot remove I cannot approve the latest one unless the other 2 have been approved already. Are there any questions on the approval process or the information captured in the flight log? Okay. Now one might ask, and I get that question quite often, how do I replace my currently existing tag log with this electronic version based on iCamp? And there is no simple answer to that, because the existing tag log, which is basically a combination of flight log and maintenance log, is capturing more information than just the flight information, right? You would have discrepancies added as well on a tag log, and you would apply signatures or releases on a tag log as well. You would have additional checklists like the pre-flight and the post-flight check ticked off on the tag log. So to capture all that information in an electronic version, you would have to go different places in iCamp. So the flight log is solely the version to capture the flight information itself. If you need to create a discrepancy, let's say the flight attendant finds something in the cabin defective, pilots could create a discrepancy for that. You would go to the list of discrepancies. Check if an open discrepancy for that problem already exists. Please keep in mind these are demo aircraft. Usually you probably won't have 155 open items on your aircraft, but nobody's cleaning that up, and everybody's using the same aircraft for training and demo purposes. So let's say you had a discrepancy, you would then, okay, that's a deferred item. You get the idea. You start creating the discrepancy, and in the notes field, you would capture the flight log number. So there is, there is a way to capture additional documents, and in the description of the discrepancy, you would say this affects flight log ID number such and such, whatever has been created before. Found, I don't know, left hand. See. Yeah, you get the idea. So you can capture the discrepancies, then the technician can, or engineer can put it on a work order and technician can work on it. So the workflow of the discrepancies is split from that of a tag log. What's also quite nice for flight crews is the ramp check feature. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. So in the ramp check section, you can have a basic pilot briefing, if you will, for that specific aircraft. You will see like brackets on top and at the bottom the next maintenance and the latest maintenance performed. In between, you get information on the discrepancies, as we've just seen in the discrepancy list as well. So take some time to load. And by the way, a limitation of the tag log, if you will, or the only way how it works is if you're online, because if you're not online, you cannot even access iCamp. We are working on offline capabilities, but I have not received any estimate of when this might be available. Okay. So back to the ramp check, you see next to maintenance on top, the recent maintenance performed at the bottom. You can upload documents into iCamp for each aircraft. So that's where you would put all the certificates like a noise certificate, insurance certificate, registration, airworthiness certificate, and that kind of stuff, or a copy of the MEL. I know you need to have those documents physically on board anyway, but it's very nice to for the crews to have them available on their tablets or mobile phones as well. And then you could also see the discrepancies here, the completed ones and the open ones. It's now one more than before because we just created another discrepancy. And if the crew wanted, they could also create the discrepancy right from here. So when they start the flight or pre-flight actually, they would go into the ramp check, and if they've had any findings here, which required, for instance, to open an MEL item, they could do it right from here. And then another tool is the checklist feature, which is available here. So you can, as an administrator, you can create checklists on a very convenient basis. Let me just show you here the checklist management. It's open already, and let's have a look. Pre-flight check for this aircraft. You see, you can have section titles. You can have individual check items. You can capture values for a log, like you can have checklist items like tire pressure or oil uplift, or whenever you need to add text, you can do so by creating fields for input. You see, you can actually build quite complex checklists, and they will be available in an electronic version on iCamp. You can also, as a fallback solution, print a couple of blank checklists and put them on board as well. You see, those are the values to be captured. You'd have date, hours, landings, and each page could be signed off by the pilot, for instance. But there is a special checklist that I wanted to show you in In this case, because I've heard from customers with a paper-based tag log that they want to capture, the security check or the fact that the daily check or pre-flight check has been performed, or any kind of operational mission type that's not captured in the flight log. So let's say this was an ETOPS flight and you want to capture that information, you can do so by just putting that item on the checklist. And how that looks in iCamp, we can see here. So let's open up a new checklist, choosing the template. And now before the pilots depart, they would go in and say, okay, I'm gonna perform the security check. And you see what happens here. The system captures the name and the timestamp automatically. And this is available immediately in the checklist oversight for the respective aircraft. So if you go to checklist, you see that someone has opened this checklist. It's still open, it's not completed yet. And if you dive in, you would see, okay, for each item, what's the current state of the respective checklist item. So if the pilot goes ahead and say, okay, then they perform the daily check, or maybe it's the third flight of the day and the daily check is not even applicable, then you can click again. Pre-flight check is performed. Maybe we do have some attachments to make. So we can add a new document or picture. On the PC, it will open the file dialog. On a mobile device, you will also have the option to take a picture. Now again, is this an ETOPS flight? No, it's not. Then what's the flight log number? Okay, the ID is 5479. Okay, now all the items are checked, but the checklist is still not complete. If we go back, refresh, you see all the information captured with the checklist, but the status is of the whole checklist is still open. There is an additional step required, so only if all the information is correct, and that could be pilot in command responsibility to verify if all the information is correct, and then they could complete the checklist by clicking here. There are some additional actions available, so you can print it, you can email it, even delete it, or if during one of the checks you found a discrepancy, you can directly record it from here. Okay. In our case, we're just going to complete the checklist. And now it shows in the completed checklist section. There's one completed now. And here it's gonna disappear because we are currently showing only the open checklist. So if we wanna see all of them, there it is, it's completed now. I completed it. And that's the information. So on the checklists, we don't capture signatures, but we capture who has performed the checklist and each checklist item with a timestamp. And I think all three functions together, the checklist, the discrepancy feature, and the flight log history, all those three together could comprise a full tag log system for your fleet, depending authority approval, of course. Are there any questions on either checklists or flight log history or the old flight log? Okay, again, Mustafa, I saw your second response on the question of the mistake. If a huge mistake happens, like 200 hours, that seems to be a setup issue, right? So in that case, you can contact the analyst by just clicking on the analyst name here, or the support team by clicking on the speech bubble on top here. Both will just open an email dialogue to the respective recipient. You can attach screenshots. You can describe the issue, and they will fix it for you. 200 hours should not even happen actually, because there are safety measures or consistency checks applied, similar to what you see when you edit the aircraft times. Okay, there we go. Do we have it active here? So if we had, let's see if that is, you see, usually it's not possible to go over some reasonable values. The system will usually take the projected times, and I don't know by how many times. I think 3 times the projected times is the limit for the logical tests in the aircraft times. And if I'm not mistaken, same applies to the flight log. Any other questions? Okay, there don't seem to be any raised hands or questions. I think I mentioned that this might going to be a short-term webinar. I thank you very much for your attendance. Again, if you need a certificate, then please let me know individually. If you want to have the flight log activated, this can be done by the analyst or myself or the FSR for your region. I've seen that we also have from time to time participants from Hong Kong or China that are participating in our webinars. We do have FSRs in Asia as well. If there are no further questions, then have a great day and bye-bye.